Now joining the first team NFL draft and college football podcast, we got Mr. Brian Stevens, who's a star offensive lineman, plays center for the University of Virginia. I was just chopping up with Brian beforehand, actually, because he was a person that I didn't know anything about before this summer evaluation period started. Found his name, was on my list, went back, watched some of his film, because there's actually a couple other Virginia offensive linemen that I'm pretty interested in, especially the Boley kid over at left tackle. But we'll talk about all that here. Brian Stevens joining the show. Brian, you have a fascinating background, man. I really am excited to be able to dig into it, but thank you so much for joining the show today, man. It's very appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no doubt, man. So you are not the first former Dayton player that I've had on this podcast, man. First one I ever had was Adam Troutman, actually, a few years ago. And I know that Dayton does put out some really good football players, obviously, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about just kind of starting this out, because I went back and saw obviously some of your recruiting profiles and obviously the bio on both Dayton and at Virginia. So I know you're an Ohio guy originally. You're from Milford High School out there in the state of Ohio. So you stayed in state to play at Dayton. Wanted to just kind of get a little bit of insight, I guess, into the recruiting background a little bit. Because for people that don't know, Dayton is a Pioneer League team. So that means that it's a non-scholarship league. That's the non-scholarship league in the FCS. So we'd just love to hear a little bit of the background of how you originally ended up at Dayton.
Yeah. So I kind of, high school, I kind of had a few injuries that kind of probably delayed me in my recruiting process. So kind of my junior year, because that's kind of the tape you get, heavily evaluated on. So that kind of probably hurt me a little bit. I mean, I was kind of a 6'2", kind of bigger body. I played linebacker all the way up until my sophomore year and made the transition to O-line, D-line. So I kind of played both ways there. So it was kind of interesting to see what teams would, wanted me for O-line or D-line. So kind of what had happened, I kind of wanted to have more of a Division I experience. So Dayton and those kind of, the Pioneer schools was kind of more intriguing. So I think like Morehead State was one of my first offers going into that summer of senior year. And funny enough, going through my O-line coach, Austin King at the time, he'd gone to Northwestern with Zach Streif, which Zach Streif played for the Saints and ultimately went to Milford High School too as well. So I'd gone to his camp since I was little and stuff like that. So there was a great, connection between O-line coach and me already. So that was kind of a good, solid understanding there. And kind of just, I wasn't sure if I was going to play football, was just going to go to school, things like that. And I just I think we had a snow day in February one day, and I had already had kind of my offer. I knew their big schools were coming after me. I was like, hey, this is what we're going to do. Dayton felt like home. So that's it.
Well, and obviously long term, it has really worked out for you now playing for the Cavaliers. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about that Dayton career, because when I was looking at the background, I saw you had some experience at offensive tackle. I saw that you were a very big contributor at guard, and were actually a co-captain as well, your final year at Dayton. So just take me through a little bit of that, I guess, that playing career at Dayton and all the versatility and experience that you were able to gain to be able to play a few different positions, obviously.
Yeah. So, I mean, I probably wasn't the biggest kid coming into college. I was probably about 235, 240. So, I mean, the biggest struggle was trying to put on weight. So, I mean, obviously I'm about 300 now, but probably didn't play close to that when I was at Dayton. So, but ultimately I kind of got my call at left tackle. So I played there. Obviously COVID, we didn't play sophomore year. So I probably would have made the transition to play a little bit over there. But junior year, started 10 games at left tackle, and then senior year, kind of felt good with a couple other young guys, so they bumped me inside left guard. So kind of loved, all I cared about was playing. It didn't matter where it was, where they were going to put me. And then so left tackle ended up tearing his ACL the last 3 games of the year, my senior year when I was a captain and things like that. So they bumped me back out there for the last 3 games, and the rest was kind of history. So I'm a 6'2" body. I'm not your stereotypical, 6'5" tackle in the league, but, I just kind of had the mentality that, I love going one-on-one versus somebody. So,
yeah. Well, and I want to ask, obviously, about the transition to Virginia and how that conversation all came about. But we were actually talking before we started about, so the film that I've seen of you is at the center position. And it turns out, and you give me a little bit of background here, that's not something you've done a ton in your career, a little bit in high school. But talk to me about first year at Virginia on the FBS level, major Power 5 level, now Power 4 level, playing against some of the greatest teams in college football in the ACC. What was that transition like, moving to center, a spot that you haven't played a ton, obviously, in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes a lot with, being an older guy, playing in some environments. I mean, I hadn't played in front of 70,000, but I'd probably played in front of 20, a couple, Southern Illinois or a couple other FCS teams. But, it was kind of not to say a big transition going from like Davidson, my last game of the year at Dayton, to Tennessee at, in Nashville at the Titan Stadium. But, I think being, that older guy, you kind of have a sense for, the lights aren't still as bright, regardless of who you play in front of or what team you're playing. I think that kind of comes with experience, but same thing. I mean, I just wanted to help the team win. Coach had called me up. I think it was week 3 after the James Madison game, said, hey, we're going to try to make a switch and move you to center. So kind of through camp and things like that, we had, experimented it, but I'd kind of solidified myself over at right guard. So I played 2 games there and then transitioned to center week 3 versus Maryland. But I'd always done, center QB exchange my 4 years at Dayton. So I was kind of our emergency guy. If, 1 and 2 center went down, I was kind of the slotted guy that they would have had to move some pieces around. So I'd always snapped and things like that, but just not in a live game. And like you had mentioned, in high school, I had to play like 1 or 2 games where I snapped. But outside of that, never really at the college level started a game at center till week 3.
So your first start at center versus the final game of this season for Virginia, where now you have a lot of games under your belt at center, or at least a decent amount of games at center. How much more comfortable were you by the end of the season? Because the way I do it is I like to watch 3 games on players at least. And those 3 games, I kind of spray it around. So like I'll watch one early game, I'll watch one middle of the year game, and then I'll watch an end of the year game to just see how that comfortability kind of comes into effect. How much more comfortable were you by the end of the season, your first year with Virginia?
I mean, I felt already comfortable, I think, so my dad always jokes about it because I called him week 3 because I'm not sure if they were going to go to Maryland. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to make the switch to center. So, even that, like I was kind of still just locked in, focusing on, responsibility. It wasn't even snapping the ball or anything like that. It's kind of just like, not to say it's second nature, but I was like kind of blanked. I was coming off on the sideline, be like, oh, wait, how were snaps? And they're like, oh, no problem, stuff like that. So, Calandria and Tony Muskett, they're great. So they're normally, they'll tell me if it's wrong. They'll tell me if it's right too. So it's kind of, they're 2 good guys to be around as well. So they make me extremely comfortable. Tony being an FCS transfer. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it as well, as having that, just relationship with your quarterback. Cause sometimes I think you get astray when you're not kind of connected that close and things like that. But, even my short time with the offensive line, I mean, it's great. Everybody's coming back this year too. I mean, it's just going to be, I hope it just ends up exploding, even more than what we did last year.
So I wanted to ask about the transfer portal experience, I guess. So you decide to enter the portal, you end up at Virginia. Take me through the chaos there, because you obviously an FCS guy, but offensive linemen are just such a good offensive lineman, I should say, are such a hot commodity in the portal all the time. So what was your experience in the portal, and how ultimately did you end up at Virginia to begin with?
Yeah. So I had ultimately, so like you had mentioned with Dayton, the Pioneer League, it's non-scholarship. So my main goal was to try to attain a scholarship. So my head coach at Dayton ultimately stepped down. So kind of made it a little bit easier to think about, do I take a 5th year at Dayton? Do I do that? So I was like, well, I'll hit the portal, which ultimately a new head coach came in, said I could come back if I wanted to, but I'd already kind of had some scholarship offers on the table. So it was kind of not the first choice. So I kind of had, it's stressful. It's just like getting recruited out of high school. I mean, you're having all sorts of teams, all sorts of recruiting guys hitting you up through Twitter, saying, oh, can you send me this transcript, grades, Ultimately, I had more time because I was a May grad, so I had to graduate that spring. So I had a little bit more time, but it probably also, a lot of teams had hit me up, say, all right, we'll circle back after spring ball, and then I never heard from. But I had already committed to Virginia by then anyway, so it was kind of, funny in that aspect. But so how I kind of landed at Virginia was Maverick Morris. So he was the O-line coach at Louisiana Monroe, and then ultimately got hired as the assistant O-line at Virginia. So then Coach Heffernan, funny enough, is also a Dayton grad. He played football at Dayton. So kind of the story is Maverick brought my name up and thought like, oh, he was yanking his chain, because he brought up Dayton or whatnot. And, watched my tape, liked me, kind of built that relationship. And, the rest was kind of history because we had a lot of already connections from, the equipment guys from Dayton still being there, the strength guys, a couple of the coaches on staff. My head coach, I think, was his defensive coordinator when he was there. So there was a lot of, stuff that was already pre-built that both of us didn't know about. And then it kind of was just a match made in heaven. So
I wanted to ask about the offensive line because you already hit on it a little bit, but number 77, the left guard, was a guy that I had written down. I mentioned Boley before, number 52, the left tackle. You guys have some talent up front, man. I feel like a couple years ago, that's one spot that Virginia was really struggling when Coach Elliott came in originally, was like, let's strengthen the offensive line. Let's get better on both sides of the ball in that capacity. The offensive line that you guys have coming back has a lot of talent, man. Can you just talk about that group a little bit that you guys have?
Yeah, absolutely. Boley, he's your stud. He's an athletic freak. We were kind of banged up a little last year with kind of some lingering injuries. So that kind of didn't help on those guys. But he's a freak of nature. Josie, left guard, 77. He's a dude too. He was I had him on my official visit there. We kind of nice. Initially connected through that. But he's a funny guy. He loves football. He's a gritty guy. He loves putting his face in there. He's not afraid of anything either. So and even the right side with kind of the mix of Ty Furnish, who kind of originally started center, and he was kind of our a little bit of our swing guy, but he was heavily important too. He's athletic as well. And then Blake Steen, he's the brother of Tyler Steen, who went to Alabama and is on the Eagles now. So he's another young buck who's, I think he's going to be a big star one day too.
So I mentioned you obviously getting to play against a lot of great teams now at the University of Virginia, but also when I was doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Virginia defense, that you guys have a lot of guys coming back as well. I know that when you're in practice, you're playing more ones versus twos, ones versus scout, like that type of thing. But when you get to go against this first team defense for Virginia, people probably don't talk about, Cameron Butler and Jackson at linebacker and Robinson. And there's a lot of great defensive players, especially in the front seven for this team coming back. Sanker at safety, I believe, is another guy that I had written down as well. Take me through just how talented that defensive unit is in general and what kind of challenges they give to you guys when you do the ones versus ones during practice.
Yeah, same thing. They hit the transfer portal hard this year too. So, they got some great athletes in the secondary as well to help, Jonas out too. But, going against Jock Carter, he's he's a great human being, but he's an even, better football player. He is that committed. He's in the gym every day, Jaw's a big boy. So, not to say I hadn't seen, too many guys there in the PFL, but Jaw was probably one of my, bigger opponents I had kind of just faced. Sure. So he kind of gave me a little bit of trouble, but I think it's kind of just the adjustment. Once you get through, you kind of not rise up to the level that you play against. But, that was one guy that really stood out to me. Cam Butler, another guy that's, he's a Midwest. He's from Kentucky. So we actually had some mutual teammates from high school in Dayton. So it was kind of funny through that. We always talk about that. And, Cam, another great guy. He's a great athlete. Whenever we get a twist game, he comes inside. He's a stud as well. And we've been blessed with two great linebackers too. James and Cam, they're two studs. That was my biggest transition from probably FCS to FBS was linebacker speed. So I think everything's kind of real relevant. You'll find a 6'2" body, D lineman that's 280, maybe 300 between both leagues. But, FBS guy might be a little bit more athletic.
Sure.
But, playing against guys like Peyton Wilson and a couple other linebackers, the speed's just a little bit different. That was probably my biggest no to change between kind of the two leagues.
Well, and this show is going to be talking about, as you mentioned, Jackson at linebackers, a 2025 guy that we're going to be talking about a lot, but the Robinson kid who was a freshman last year at line, and I know you just mentioned him a little bit, man, that kid's a freak show. Absolute freak that you guys got over there, man.
Yeah. He really stepped it up last year because I don't really think they were having him slotted to play at first. I know they kind of had a little bit of a rotation going on. But Josh Aher, another guy last year that really helped us out too, and was a stud. Had a little bit of a wrist problem or something, but he was, he was probably the number 3 that ended up getting bumped because Cam was playing so well when he got his call. So,
yeah. Well, so I wanted to ask just about, I guess, this offseason outlook for you guys as a team a little bit, because I know Coach Elliott, I thought we saw a lot of good signs this past season, right? Like the offense, I thought took a nice step forward, a lot more competitive compared to what they were the year before. Like there was signs that this program is going to a good level with Coach Elliott. Just talking about this offseason, I guess, maybe compared to your first. I mean, I know when you're coming in as a transfer, there's, a lot of things that are being thrown at you at once. You're trying to get used to a routine and everything, but just comparative to first off season coming into Virginia and where you guys are now, what's the vibe and the pulse around the program right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about Coach E a little bit, but I mean, he's probably one of the best player coaches and best coaches I've ever been around. I mean, he's one of the guys that, you love to play for. I mean, same thing, whole coaching staff. I mean, even top to bottom from, football operations to the recruiting guys. I mean, they've bought into Coach E's culture. I mean, I think you're really going to see the benefits here soon. And, just off season, I came in the summer, so I didn't really get to see the full, spring or winter workouts. But,
sure,
me and Tony always joke about it being FCS guys. Like, all we did was run. So I was like, when he came in too, he was like, well, we're just about our bases, right with these guys. So that wasn't really much of a problem. But, I mean, it's really, they're amping it up. I mean, I think we're bringing back over probably 80% of production from last year. I mean, we're going to have some big shoes to fill with Malik leaving, a couple of the tight ends, a couple key guys on defense. But, the attitude and things moving forward, like, we're ready to go. I mean, if we had to play tomorrow, I think there'd be, the entire team would be ready to go. So.
Love that. Well, and I wanted to ask just about the transition to Virginia a little bit, as far as, because you mentioned it when you first came in, you're like a 235-pound, like undersized guy, right? And now like you said, you're close to right around 300 pounds now. How big was, I guess, this full off season at Virginia, but just also this past first year with Virginia to be able to really continue to develop yourself physically? Because I know obviously we're talking about nutrition and strength and conditioning, programs and all that type of stuff. It's obviously a kick up from where you were previously. So how beneficial has that been for you?
Immensely. I mean, we just the funds differently between, an FCS non-scholarship team to FBS. I mean, we had zero nutrition at Dayton. Strength conditioning, we've got 2 strength coaches, but they handle all the sports. So it's not just football. So going in there now, you got 5-6 guys, plus you got the students and interns. Like, you got somebody that needs to work with you, like you got somebody available. Sometimes, like at Dayton, you may not have that availability or that personalized kind of experience that you would at like an FBS level. But,
sure,
physicality wise, I always kind of considered myself, I was, up to speed with everybody, even when I got there. But, you can probably be even more physical with, technique, hands, all sorts of things. So I think, transitioning year 2, and especially at like, a new position, the picture of everything kind of just shifts a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Well, now I was going to say, kind of, I guess, to add on to that a little bit also, I guess you can also throw in just how this offseason has been, not only just from the development standpoint, but also, you as a leader, now as a veteran of this group, now as the center and the kind of the vocalist up front full time. How do you feel like you asserted yourself this offseason, even just outside the physical development, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think being an older guy, I think I kind of had to last year, because we didn't have any other 5th years. I mean, I was already I was the oldest guy in the room. So I kind of already had within that aspect. So even at Dayton, I was the oldest guy in the room once COVID happened when I was a sophomore. So, I mean, I kind of had to mature early. So I'm used to holding the ropes a little bit in that regard, but being able to see a lot of the young guys, in spring ball, being able to help them, go through my experience, I think it helps them just because they know I've been through it. They probably trust me a little bit more, because I think it's always hard when you're coming into a new place and you can't just, take the reins right away. So I think that, you got to be able to build the trust between, the O-line, but the entire offense, then the entire team. So I think once kind of everybody probably respects me, as of now. So I think it's a little bit more easier to jump into that role, and it's kind of just come naturally a little bit.
Well, and Brian, my last question for you is, because obviously the reason I wanted to have you on here was have been one of my pleasant surprises from a film watching perspective so far this summer. We're still in spring technically, but this summer evaluation period, right? And I didn't know who you were really before this. I watched your film and I have become enamored with you, to be honest, as a football player. And I posted obviously a couple clips just of you on Twitter. I mean, a couple of things that I really love, just kind of highlighted for the people that haven't seen a couple of the clips I put out, was you are a physically dense, strong kid. But the thing that really popped to me was you guys run a lot of zone where you're going to be asked, when you're not covered, work up to the second level and be able to utilize your athleticism both laterally and functionally to the second level a lot. And you can move, man. So I was just really impressed by the all around prospect that you could be at the center position. Like you said, 6'2", 295, 300 pounds, probably somewhere in that ballpark. But the ability that you have both to work laterally and up to the second level was something that I was super impressed about. But my last question for you is, just generally speaking, you've had the hell of a journey, man. I mean, literally, like you said, some injuries in high school to non-scholarship at Dayton to now all ACC center in only a couple of years. And now a person I consider a legit 2025 NFL draft prospect. Just, I guess, taking a step back, man, because I know there's a big season in front of you and a lot of expectations out there. But that journey's wild, man. What's it like to just kind of be living that journey and to know that you have the potential to make it on the next level, a spot that I'm not sure maybe you thought was attainable at some points? I don't know.
Yep. No, I mean, I think, I'm grateful for it all. I wouldn't give up my Dayton experience for everything, for anything either. Those relationships I built there. I was just up there yesterday, just saying hi to the coaching staff, some of the guys that are still hanging around. It's awesome to be able to kind of look back on that, go through it, wow, but things kind of just, fell into place for me. And it kind of just seemed like, things were available and this was how it was. And this, I think, was how it was supposed to go. So I think, I'm grateful for, obviously Coach Heffernan, Coach King, who originally gave me the shot to, go to Dayton because I wasn't really sure if I was going to play, but, I'm still hungry and, we'll see what happens. So,
yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much again, man. We're taking some time today. I'm grateful for you coming on the show. Again, Brian Stevens, star offensive lineman out of the University of Virginia, 2025 NFL draft prospect. If you guys haven't already, make sure to go watch some Virginia film from this last year. Check out the center, the last few games of the year. Brian, I really appreciate your time again, man. This was a pleasure. Best of luck. And thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.